Big Brian's barbecue is by far the best food in town. People flock to it, no matter the time of year. Some even come from across the state line for a taste. There isn't anything on the menu that isn't great. They make their own sauces and use local meat. You can tell that they really care about the food that they make. The restaurant itself is just a small building. No more than 10 or so people can fit. That's pushing it, honestly. It's always crowded, even though there's plenty of outside seating. You see, Brian's has a neighbor, and if it weren't for the mouth-watering food, this guy would probably run all the patrons off. His name is Roger, or Rodney, something like that. Everyone just calls him Old Rod. This dude is abnormally tall, and so skinny you wonder how he doesn't topple over at the slightest breeze. He runs a hardware store, but no one really shops there. He's always covered in grease and has a permanent scowl on his face. He's yelled at more than a few little kids for playing in front of his store. Usually, you can find him staring out the grimy windows, watching people come in and out of Brian's. At night, a yellow light glows deep from within the store. Sometimes you see his shadow still at the window. If you stay up late enough, you can hear the old creep doing God knows what behind his store. There's a tall fence that circles the back lot that prevents any spying eyes. No one has dared to try and cross it either. You can hear metal banging on metal, scrapes and clinks. Every now and then, you'll hear the unmistakable sound of a blade being sharpened. Legitimate nightmare fuel. When I turned 16, my parents decided it was time for me to get a job. Since Brian's was always so busy, they were usually hiring. Working there sounded like a lot more fun than working at a local grocery store. Getting some free barbecue and hanging out with others my age was way better than bagging groceries and pushing carts. I didn't have to do a resume or an interview. I walked in, told the main cook I wanted a job, and he gave me a general idea of my schedule. He shook my hand, handed me an apron, and told me he'd see me tomorrow. At first, working at Brian's was chaotic. A lot of running around, squeezing by people in the tight kitchen, and it was hot as hell. I eventually got used to it, and within a year, was one of the seniors. I worked there all throughout high school. I grew to love it. The smell, the excitement, the people, and of course the freebies. It was nice seeing the locals come in, and fun to see out-of-town folks drop by. The owner himself, Mr. Brian Harris, is a fun guy. He's in his 60s and on the husky side. His cheeks are always flushed and his laugh is hearty and loud. He kind of reminds me of Santa Claus, to be honest. He often helps in the kitchen when we're short-staffed. Him and I grew up to be pretty close. I would help him run small errands, and we'd talk and joke around. Some said I was a brown nose, but I just genuinely liked our conversations. I had worked unusually late one night. Everyone else was gone, and it was only Brian and I. When I finally said goodbye and left, it was dark outside. No one was around, and the only lights on were the dim street lights. I only live a few minutes away, so it's more convenient and it saves gas to walk home. The only drawback, I have to walk past Old Rod's hardware. I'd never had a problem with it, but I had also never left this late. He wasn't standing by the window, which was a relief. I couldn't help but slow down as I walked past. That gross yellow light was on, and I could just barely make out what looked like a large closet in the back of the store. I didn't see Rod anywhere. I was standing with my face pressed to the dirty glass. I'd never been this close at night, so my curiosity got the best of me. A few minutes went by and still no Rod, just the glow of a bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling. I jumped when I saw the old man. He didn't seem to notice me. He was busy. He was focused on dragging something behind him. It was too long to be a bag of trash. It must have been heavy, because he couldn't drag it very fast. He turned into what I thought was a closet, and disappeared with whatever he had been dragging. It turns out it wasn't a closet, but a set of stairs going down into the basement of the store. I jumped back from the window. I had no idea what I just witnessed, but I felt chills all over my body. I told myself it was just a bag full of tools or scrap from his store. I walked home fast that night. I had a hard time falling asleep that night. The next couple weeks went by like normal. Maybe a month passed when I got stuck cleaning the kitchen after a shift. Brian helped some, but it was still late when I got out. I stepped outside and immediately looked at the hardware store. The light was on again. I debated running past the store, but when I reached it, I found myself peeping through the windows again. Once again, the bare light bulb illuminated the back of the store. This time, I didn't have to wait long to see Rod dragging yet another suspicious bag down the stairs. Like an idiot, I decided to investigate. I crept around the side of the building. Bushes and vines were taking over the narrow space. I almost walked past it, but right at the ground there was a small window. I pushed weeds back and wiped off some dirt that was caked onto the glass. A faint light cast shadows all over a messy basement. Tools, boxes, and scrap metal were scattered about. Right in the middle was a metal work table, long, wide, and scratched up. On one end, there was some sort of contraption that had a handle. Rod thumped down a set of stairs on the far end. The object he was dragging bounced off each step. With great effort, he managed to pick up the bag and place it on the table. My stomach rose to my throat, and I prayed this was all a misunderstanding. He slowly cut open the black bag. My suspicions were confirmed, and I started to shake. I gagged when he revealed a body. The head had been shaved, and it was naked. I couldn't tell if it was a man or woman. It looked like it had been skinned. I don't want to believe it. The old man was a creep for sure. But this? Just then, Rod jerked his head around and looked straight at the window. Straight at me. I fell back. Tears filled my eyes as I slid on the damp grass trying to get up. When I finally reached the pavement, I didn't stop running until I got home. It's a small, safe town. No one ever locks their doors. I tore through ours and slammed it shut. I didn't turn on any lights, and I looked out of each window to make sure no one had followed me. I triple-checked the lock before finally backing away. Even after a scorching shower that left my skin pink, I felt dirty. There was no way I could sleep. Every few minutes I would sit up to look out my window. Every time I opened my eyes, I could see Rod cutting open that bag, and that face, looking at me. I had a morning shift the next day, thank God. As soon as I came through the doors, I headed straight for Brian. I told him everything. I was crying when I finished. I was so scared and disturbed. I didn't know what to do. I should have called the damn police. Brian turned serious. He's never serious, so seeing him this way was unnerving. He pulled me to the side and, to my surprise, told me to forget what I saw. He said it would only cause trouble if I told anyone else, and that I could get hurt. Of course, I did what he said. He'd also been honest and nice to me. I trusted him. I didn't know why he told me not to talk. I didn't question it, just nodded and kept my mouth shut. I became paranoid every time I would see the store. Every time I saw old Rod, I got sick. I knew he was watching me. I didn't get much sleep after that. People noticed too. I wasn't doing well at work, forgetting orders and dropping plates. I know I looked terrible. I couldn't help it. What I saw was eating me alive. It was burned on the back of my eyelids. I finally decided that I had to do something. I couldn't keep living with this guilt. I managed to find Brian alone. I had to talk to him. I told him what was going on, that I couldn't keep going. Something had to be done. Brian looked grave. He was silent for a long time, seemingly debating something in his head. Finally, when he spoke, he told me he needed to show me something. He said I was his most trusted employee, and more than that, a dear friend. He walked me towards his office, looking over his shoulder both ways. He unlocked the door and led me inside. Once I was in, he shut and locked the door behind us. The office wasn't what I expected. It was lit up by a single lamp. Sticky notes covered his desk. All along the walls were missing posters and police reports. I didn't recognize the faces. Brian watched me take it all in. Finally, he spoke. He said for years he knew something was up with the neighbor. He said he was well aware of what was going on in Rod's basement. He said all the missing posters were tourists that had come into town but had never left. Brian said in a hushed voice, "They're the easiest targets, because no one would notice an out-of-town person missing." I was confused. Easiest? Without saying another word, Brian walked me out the back door of the restaurant. There are 2 freezer trailers parked in the back. One was much smaller, and only Brian had a key for it. I'd never given it a second thought, barely even noticed it. He unlocked the big padlock on the door and pushed aside the plastic curtains. We stepped in, and at least a half a dozen frozen faces greeted me. Bodies hung from the ceiling of the cooler, some skinned, some fresh. Bile rose in my mouth. I turned to Brian. He had a grin on his face. "You see, kid, I found the best type of meat for barbecue. It's a little difficult to come by, but oh, they love it. Once you've had a taste, you're hooked." He laughed, looking at me with a wild look in his eyes. "Rod works for me. He keeps an eye on the place, knows the locals. He provides the goods. If it weren't for him, well, this joint wouldn't exist." Another chuckle and proud look on his face as he scanned the freezer. I felt dizzy. "It's a shame though. You really were my best. Definitely my favorite." Brian clapped me on the shoulder and stepped out of the freezer before I could open my mouth. He locked the door and left me here. It's been hours. I can barely type this. I had my phone in my pocket, so I decided I needed to spread the word. The son of a bitch will probably change the name of the place. I doubt I'll last much longer. Who knows, maybe he'll name a meal after me. I hope it tastes good.